This is It Matters, the show that digs beneath the surface of our political landscape, pop culture, and the 2024 election. I'm your host, Michael Starr Hopkins, a born and bred Washingtonian who knows the ins and outs of DC. I've worked with political heavyweights from presidents to governors and members of Congress. I also write for and appear on The Hill, The Daily Beast, MSNBC, and News Nation. Now I'm bringing you prominent politicians, cultural icons, and the unfiltered truth. So buckle up and join me as we navigate this crazy world together and look at the issues that matter the most. This is It Matters. Let's dive in. All right, on today's show, we've got Cheyanne Daniels, The Hill's race and politics reporter, and the creator and host of one of my favorite podcasts, The Switch Up. How's it going?
You're so kind. You're so kind. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Just trying to figure out how we're going to survive the next 5 or 6 months of election coverage. You excited?
Is it bad if I say no?
No, I think that's called honesty. What's it like to be a reporter covering politics in this day and age, especially preparing for a presidential?
The world is moving 60 miles per hour and I'm on a little bicycle trying to keep up with it. And then everybody's behind me throwing tomatoes at me, screaming, "Why aren't you pedaling faster? Pedal faster." And I'm just like, oh my God, can I have some water, please? That's where I'm at in this moment.
Is it a lot of travel? Is it a lot of going from campaign to event? How does that stuff work?
So for me, no, which I'm not upset about. But it is definitely a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of emails coming in of folks who are desperate to get their side of the story presented. And those range from anywhere from this candidate is racist to we're not racist, but here's why we're saying the things that we're saying. And it's okay, I need all of us to sort of take a step back. Let's work on our pitching. But overall, it's a lot of interviews with, for me, a lot of our high-ranking Black leaders, Congressional Black Caucus, all of that fun stuff.
What's it like to be interviewing leaders of the free world, such influential people? You are part of history. You are writing history. Does that ever hit you at any moment?
It's funny you say this because I actually had this moment last week when I was covering the 70th anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education decision. And I was speaking with Representative Al Green and then Representative Joyce Beatty. And, I have a little bit of a working relationship with both of them. And they both kind of opened up and were talking about what they had endured, from Al Green sharing about not being in an integrated school until he was a senior in high school and having an encounter with a white girl who was screaming and being like, "Oh my God, he touched me. It touched me." Yeah. To Joyce Beatty sharing about how when her family moved so that she could have a better education to attend an all white school, they would burn garbage cans on their front lawns. And it struck me in this moment how what it means to be a Black leader today, even in America, and what a lot of Black leaders have faced just to be able to get to where they are. And I'm sure somebody somewhere is going to come out and be like, well, they're too old to be in Congress if, you can remember being segregated and not going to an integrated school. That's a different conversation. But it really struck me in this moment of just the strides and what our Black leaders have sacrificed for me to be able to sit down and talk to them and get their insight on what are you worried about in this election cycle? Are you worried about voter suppression? Are you worried about Roe v. Wade? Or obviously that decision's been overturned. And it definitely becomes a moment where when they open up like that and you realize, oh, I guess you had to be an American citizen and you had to go through all of this. And sometimes I think it's so easy to forget that. When we're all angry or we're all super invested or we're all throwing our hands up going, everything's insane. So I have those moments occasionally where I just feel very, honored. And I don't think that's based on politics or anything. But just where I just realize how special it is to be able to interview people who are making history in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like my grandparents. They were the first integrated high school class. I tell this story a lot in DC. In DC, because of the ruling, the federal government said with all deliberate speed, so we'll integrate schools in DC first. And they showed up to Theodore Roosevelt in DC, the Rough Riders. Shout out DC. And the principal told them on the first day, "We don't want you here, but if you're going to be here, don't destroy the school." And I'll never forget my grandmother saying that, like, some of the people in her class there was an astronaut, there was like doctors, lawyers, accountants that came from that class. And she just remembered them all looking at each other and thinking, like, what do you mean destroy the place? Like, we're good students too. And that's, people often talk about like, oh, that's so long ago, like it's such the past. And that is not past.
No, nope.
Like,
It's really
like that's not even like a different page of the book. Like we're still, that's just a different paragraph.
Yeah. Well, even, when I think about too, just what like Black media professionals are dealing with just every day, I get a lot of vitriol just for covering Black Americans. Like not even anything crazy, but it'll be like, Black Americans feel XYZ. And then people are like, why do we give a crap what Black people? And it's like, okay, I think you just need to put your hood back on and take a step aside for a moment. But it's like, we're not that far removed from when people weren't allowed to go to schools. And if I'm still sitting here just trying to write an article and people are pissed off about that, maybe, we need to realize we're not that far away from when that happened.
Yeah. Loving v. Virginia was decided in 1968. That was the law, for those of you who don't know, that made it legal for interracial marriages. That means that my mother, who was born in 1963, was born before interracial marriages would have been legal. Like that's terrifying. And the idea that now, as we look at a Supreme Court that could potentially be rolling back rights, we've seen already them roll back voting rights. We've seen them roll back abortion rights. As you talk to Black voters, as you talk to leaders of the Black community, do you think that there's a real understanding of what this moment is?
The one phrase that I have heard consistently from Black strategists, Black leaders, Black advocates is that this election is literally life or death for Black Americans. And they point to things like the overturning of Roe v. Wade and access to reproductive freedom, where they point to Black mothers are literally dying from our maternal mortality crisis, and Black infants are dying because of that crisis that we're facing. When they talk about things such as the right to education, they say it's life or death, because if you don't have a right to education, if you can't get an education, how are you supposed to get a job to be able to support yourself or whatever family maybe that you're supporting? And so I think in this moment, Black leaders are heavily emphasizing that it's not dramatic, it's not melodramatic for them to be standing there saying, hey, our lives are at risk in this election, and this is why we need people to show up, to cast their ballots. And I think also that there is still that element too of a lot of people will say, it just doesn't make sense for us to not vote in an election, knowing people did die for us to be able to cast our ballots. And so it sounds really dramatic. I know there have been a few times when people would say it to me and I'd be like, okay, here we go again. Yeah. But then they start talking about what it is that they're focused on and why they're saying that. And you kind of sit there for a minute and you go, I can see why you would be saying that when you make those connections to the healthcare and to the economy and all of those things that are required in order for you to be able to not just prosper, but literally buy your groceries or to live your life.
Do you think that there's a oversampling of Black voters? I mean, you keep seeing these interviews where it's like young Black voters saying they're not going to go to the polls. They're going to sit this one out. Like, do you think that's become almost like interviewing the Trump voter in Ohio, and that there aren't as many young Black voters who, I don't want to use the term apathetic because it's not apathetic. It's a choice. But do you think that there's an overreporting? I
think that, and I think we like to blame Black voters anytime something unexpected happens in our politics, whether that's for Republicans or Democrats. For Democrats, it's often, oh, that person didn't get elected. It's because Black voters didn't show up.
Yep.
For Republicans, if they did get elected, it's, well, where were Black voters in this? Occasionally, every now and again, we also talk about white suburban women in that case too.
Or Trump talking about Philadelphia voters
Oh, yep. So I think it's we like to start to preemptively put the narrative out there to sort of justify, perhaps, especially in the case of Democrats, why Democrats are losing. Preemptively, we have to give a reason why, and oftentimes that reason is, well, because Black people aren't happy. That being said, I think we don't sample Black voters enough in our polls, and I think anybody who focuses on Black politics will tell you that. There's only a few organizations who will deliberately oversample Black voters in their polls to be able to accurately say, here's how Black voters feel.
Because Black people don't talk about like politics outside of like the home. Like it's I feel like it's kind of different. Like you try to poll Black people, like we're not answering the phone, talking to a pollster. We're not like I don't know how it works in other communities, but it feels to me like we're just not engaging in polling the same way.
And I think too, I wonder sometimes how questions are phrased, especially if you think about like polls that are on online, for instance. And
well, I've worked on campaigns who have intentionally worded polls in certain ways and intentionally phrased things so that we would get certain results. I mean, that is a fact that campaigns do, especially campaigns when they're not doing well. They will tailor a poll to get the return. I always say you can pay for a poll to say anything you want.
I like that. That's a good way to put it, because I think a lot of people put a lot of stock into polls. And so it cracks me up then when I talk with pollsters who will be like, well, yes, but no. Right? Like, it's like, yes, this is their job. So on one hand, they're going to be like, yeah, we should listen to polls. But on the other hand, they're going to be like, don't trust polls. And that's one of the reasons why. Or they'll be like, and this is something that I have been hearing, especially as more polls are coming out about how Black voters are feeling, is like, it's way too early, right? Like all of us DCers and the pundits and everything are sitting there going, election day is tomorrow, and freaking out over it, while the rest of America is going,
silly season has not started yet for the rest of America.
It's not a thing for the rest of folks yet. And so, I think it's an interesting time to be talking about. I say as I'm literally in the process of writing an article where we reference polling.
Well, here's a note to everyone who's listening. When you look at a poll, look at the crosstabs of the poll. Look at the sample size of the poll. If the sample size is under, 1,000, 1,500, then that's probably not a reliable poll. Like that's really what you want to look at when you look at a poll. What are the different variables in there? I don't know if you want to speak to as the expert.
No, I mean, I just think I do sometimes and obviously with The Hill, every time we report on a poll, we always sort of put in those caveats of, this polling was a sample size of X amount of people with a plus or minus percentage of accuracy with, between these dates. So there's all these little caveats. And but yeah, it always strikes me when we're like, it's a sample size of 1,500 people. And I'm like, in a country of how many millions? We sampled 1,500 people, and we're going to sit here and say it's a majority of folks feel this way. So definitely an interesting, I think, we have an interesting way of presenting what a majority is or what a majority isn't, I do think, especially when we don't take time to hear those personal anecdotes, which I think there's not room for in polls, right? It's like that yes or no, or do you believe or don't you believe, that sort of thing. Versus if you get those personal anecdotes, it shows how much more complex people are, right? And that not everything is black and white. And I think that that's okay. But yeah, I'm not a pollster, just
to be clear.
Just to be clear.
Do you think the media made too much out of the Morehouse speech and what the reception was going to be? I mean, did anyone really think that there was going to be a mass eruption at that speech? Of course, there was going to be one or two protesters, as there should be, to be honest. But Morehouse is an institution. Everyone I know who is an alumnus of Morehouse made it very clear to me that people would not act up at that graduation, not because of just their own standard, but no one wanted to mess up everybody else's graduation. They knew what it meant to the community. They knew not just the Morehouse community, but the Black community, the parents who this was their first college graduation, seeing a child graduate who traveled, spent money they may not have had. Like, you know, they knew what it meant.
And I think it was worthwhile to like sort of have that conversation about, is something going to happen? Because we have been seeing Black folks making clear, and especially young folks right now, making clear how they feel about what's happening. But that being said, I find it just in general really hard to believe that anybody who is having an iconic figure such as the President of the United States giving your commencement speech is going to disrupt that.
I don't know if he was like in Berkeley or somewhere, like I think they're probably.
Let me rephrase for Black America. Let me rephrase it, because we know what it means to have that recognition. And as you mentioned too, I think especially for Black Americans of being at an HBCU and recognizing how hard it has been for Black America to access education and to be recognized not only for your education, but to be recognized by somebody as powerful as the President of the United States. And I also, and thinking about, as you mentioned, sort of that generational thing of like, well, my mom's sitting in the back there, and possibly my grandma too.
Up, like,
and I don't think into some trouble probably if they don't have a chance to sit here and celebrate this and all of this. So I think it was worth reporting, but I don't think I personally expected any sort of big, outpouring of outrage or anything like that. And I mean, I think there was one student who stood in the back with their back turned to the president as he was speaking with their fist in the air. And then I think
which, like, God bless him.
Yes.
I fully support that. Like, I think that is exactly what Morehouse promotes and supports. And, you can't come from a place of Martin Luther King and civil disobedience and not support that kind of activism.
I think that was the part that was missing in some of the coverage, is that whatever protest was going to happen, if it was happening at the ceremony, it was not going to be disruptive.
No.
I didn't have any idea in my mind that there was going to be folks shouting out there, that there was going to be folks out there with their picket signs or whatever. It was going to be subtle. It was going to be quiet protesting, as we saw with the back turn. What was happening outside the commencement is totally different, with protesters showing up, whatever, all of that. But inside, I don't think there was ever a moment in my mind that the protest would turn into anything wild or outrageous or anything, and especially no violence. Especially, I don't think that we ever should have expected that. And so I personally wasn't surprised. I was surprised that there was only one student. I thought for sure maybe there would be more who joined in. But again, I think there was definitely some of that moment of this is my moment here. I am graduating from not just an HBCU, but as you mentioned, an HBCU that MLK went to, and why would I ruin this moment for myself and for my family?
It felt like there was a lot of people rooting for there to be some sort of disturbance and focused on there being a disturbance, and less focus on the fact that there was this class of distinguished Black men getting ready to graduate, going out into society. I mean, even the Biden administration, I think rightfully so, has been criticized for some of their messaging. They really lean into their funding of HBCUs during that trip. What do you think it is about the administration's messaging around the African-American community that's not resonating? Because it just, when you have Donald Trump kind of his messaging around funding for HBCUs, which we all know is actually factually inaccurate, like it was added by African-American members of Congress to the budget
that
initially,
CDC who was like, hey, bro, we're putting this in there,
Yeah. I mean, he initially cut that funding out and it got put back in. And now he takes credit for that funding. I mean, the same thing with the First Step Act. Like, that legislation was originally passed by Barack Obama. There were updates made by Donald Trump because members of the CBC, once again, came in and pushed that. Why haven't Democrats been able to message those things. Like, how do you lose crime to Donald Trump? The man is on trial every day. Like,
except Wednesdays, which is when Joe's free apparently too.
They're free. We got time. Joe has time on Wednesdays. Hey,
this is really interesting to me because one thing I think Democrats don't do well is they're not going on the aggressive, right? Like they're not. I think about the beautiful, erudite, incredible Michelle Obama. When they go low, we go high. I think Jasmine Crockett had it right the other day when she said, "Sometimes I'm not gonna go high."
Thank you.
Why should I?
We tried that.
And this is where I think Democrats really need to start to nail that, and they're starting to a little bit, but they're not fully attacking. Right? They want to go with this like classy sort of look of we're great. And Black voters, I think we're sitting there going, I don't care how nice you are. Yes. What have you done? What did you do for me? And when you're sitting there kind of trying to play nice and be like, oh, yeah, we got some of this. That we got to stop doing that, I think, is what Democrats need to say to themselves, right? They have to say, not only did we do this to you, here's what they didn't do for you. And that part, that connection isn't happening. So it's really easy then to sit there and say something as we're starting to hear folks being like, well, under Donald Trump, I got a check, or the economy was better, or the HBCUs. Where's the counter narrative coming where Democrats can sit there and say, actually, before we get into how Donald Trump signed that bill, here's how we did it.
Yeah.
Right. And they want to be, I think, in my view, they want to be too nice.
Yes.
And politics isn't a nice game.
And they want to be 100% right on everything.
Yeah.
Like everything has to be. I'm not saying that we should bend facts or that there's alternative facts, as Kellyanne Conway would say. But I was having this conversation on another episode with Kurt Bardella, and I think most effective messenger we've had against Trump is undoubtedly Barack Obama. I think the way he took him on at the Correspondents' Dinner was a blueprint on how you have to take on somebody like Trump. And I think that it is actually ironic because Black people understand it, because we call it Jonesin, the dozens. Like there's a culture, and see, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? There's a cultural aspect to the way that we critique and criticize people that I think Democrats need to take lessons from. Like, I can imagine the Chris Rock, the Dave Chappelle, the Barack Obama, and I know that's a weird grouping, but like that cultural aspect of getting up there and saying like, listen, Donald Trump, you like bankrupt Cheeto looking, like baby hands, 2 syllables speaking, like,
I almost want to say, and I'm probably going to get backlash for this. I probably shouldn't say, I almost want to say it's okay for us to be Black.
Yes.
Right? It's okay for them to come out
if we're going to take the blame for it, then we need to blackety black this thing up.
Right? Like it is okay to have that code switching. And that is a legitimate thing. It is okay to code switch. It is okay to code switch, especially when you are talking to these things, right? Because Republicans are doing it.
They're doing it.
When they're going out to go into, I don't know, Proud Boys talking, they're not sitting there being like, we need to be. No, they're sitting there, as we heard from Donald Trump, stand back and stand by.
Yeah.
So I think in some cases, especially Black Democrats, our Black leader, it is okay to play identity politics, because Republicans are playing identity politics, even if they say they're not, right? It is. And that is unfortunately a little bit what politics just in general is whose identity is the identity that we want representing us. And I think Democrats, so they're not leaning into who it is that they're talking to be able to say, how do I talk with you? Right? How do I reach you in a way that you understand? And I think the other element to that is as well is they're not leaning into the celebrities that they have, right? So I think about, sure, we're sending Kamala Harris to HBCUs for an HBCU tour. Fantastic, right? It is so important that young voters turn out to vote for whoever they're turning out to vote. The important thing is that they understand the power of voting. But then it's like you're sitting there going, when I think about 2008 and I think about 2012. And I mean, Barack Obama had Beyonce.
But like, how is Plies?
And
How is Plies not on a HBCU tour with like members of the Biden team? Like, there is no better surrogate to Black America right now than Plies. If you follow his tweets, his videos, the way that he explains to Black America, and like, look, I know I'm going to get criticized, and it's like, oh, you know, Black America isn't a monolithic group, blah blah blah. We can do all those little captions.
We all understand that,
but we don't have a lot of surrogates. When you look around Capitol Hill, when you look around, you know, the media, it's very white, and it's there aren't a lot of people who can be authentic and who are given the permission to be authentic and talk in a way that people understand. And so I think you're right. The administration should be leaning in to making sure that like the people who they're using as surrogates not just look like the people who they want to talk to, but also reflect the life experiences and the lived experiences. Because Donald Trump sure is like, he's putting everybody, you get everybody from, you know, the most conservative Wall Street boy to like, you know, the most conservative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like it's the whole spectrum of whiteness.
Yeah, he is not leaning, or he's not holding back. So I don't think Democrats should be holding back. And they're trying to, and I hear this when I go, for instance, like press conferences and things like that. And we're so poised, Black leaders, so poised,
we have to
ready to be the eloquent. And because because there's no other choice, because if you're
there's
not,
no room for error.
Of course, and I think we even heard Corinne Jean-Pierre speak to that a few months ago, as she was being interviewed, and she said something very similar, where she was like, I don't have a choice to mess up. I cannot mess up. And I think there's something to that. But when Black leaders are around the Black community, when they're around Black voters, it's okay to be real, to not have to be poised so much. And to think about that, because when I listen sometimes to any politician speaking, and sometimes I'm like, could you just drop the act?
Yeah.
Could you just give it to me straight? What is it that you're doing? What is this? Why is this important? You don't need to give me a whole sermon. Like, I just need the basic facts here of what you're saying. And some of that's missing. And that's a whole politics issue just in general. I think this is why so many Americans are sick of politics, right?
Yeah.
It's all the infighting, and then it's all could you talk in English maybe for half a second? But I think that these messaging tactics that they're using are clearly not working. So it has to be time to change it up, switch it up, find a new voice to say what it is that you're saying, and see how you can reach those people, because obviously what you're doing isn't working. And I think, and I heard this the other day from somebody who was like, can they stop coming to churches? Because
you can't show church on Sunday. Like,
what is going on? So I heard that the other day. And I think young
all clapping off beat.
Like standing there like, why are you here in church? Like, could you come somewhere where I don't have to think about politics maybe? Like somewhere else.
Although politics in the Black church are intertwined, you can't have one without the other.
This is true. I think people are just like, bro.
I think you're just tired.
Do you want to be here?
Yeah, I mean, you're just watching the awkward white politician in a Black church when you know it's in, like, especially Black church is like 2 hours. Like, it's not. This isn't like, my wife was Catholic and I went to mass with her. And you're like in and out in like 55 minutes. Like, this is not, you know,
no
Black
shenanigans.
Church.
All right, come on, get your little wine, get your waiter.
Yeah, no,
don't come for me, folks.
Brother Jamal is not singing his two homilies and solos before we get to a 50-minute sermon from the pastor. Do you think Corinne Jean-Pierre has been treated fairly by the media when you compare their coverage of like Kayleigh McEnany and Sarah Huckabee Sanders? You know, I'm not saying that like Corinne's been perfect, but it seems like there has really been a devaluing of her, you know, in like a very personal.
I think first and foremost, we got over really quickly that there is a white lesbian woman serving as press secretary for the White House. I think it was like there.
A black lesbian woman.
A black lesbian woman, right? Like it was all written up very quickly, and then we moved on. And it was like, great, okay, whatever. Time, that's not important anymore. So I think that was the first mistake, right? Was
I mean, that's historic.
Celebrated way more than it was. It should have been.
But they're scared. Democrats are kind of scared of our own shadow. Like we did.
It is.
Her being lesbian was something they almost like didn't want to talk about enough because it's like, oh, the Republicans are going to come after us.
Yes. So I think that was gotten over too quickly. And then I think I have to say, and granted, I'm not there most of the time or any of the times for our White House press briefings. I don't cover the White House, but we watch it, we can all see it. And there is a part of me that thinks some of these reporters push her in a way that they would never have pushed, quite frankly, a white, straight press secretary. It's like they are hoping to be able to catch her. In some sort of
a viral moment
or some sort of stumble, something like that, that we only put that type of pressure on Black folks and especially on Black women. And that's where I see it. And she's been phenomenal. And I say that without taking sides, just in what she's doing. She knows what she's doing. You can see how smart she is. You can see how clever she is. And she knows what these individuals are trying to do to her.
And put in a lot of tough positions. Like, I mean, she has to defend a lot of things that I don't think people quite understand. It is not her policy. She is standing up there and it's not what she thinks. It's not her beliefs. She is standing there on behalf of the president of the United States. And so when she has to defend things that maybe she doesn't agree with, that is her job. That's her duty. And she's the first Black woman, the first LGBTQ person. Like that, the burden of that in and of itself, I think that's got to be heavy. And I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like you can see it on her a little bit. And it makes me, kind of makes me sad because you just recognize how much politics, how it can beat you down.
Yeah. I met her, and I remember the first time that I met her, and I had this moment where I felt overcome with emotion, standing in front of somebody who was making history. And this is the thing that I think sometimes gets convoluted, is because you're standing there as a reporter and you're saying, I'm not feeling any particular way. This isn't about politics. This is about what you're representing for me and for my future and for all of my ancestors who never got to see this, and what my potential children, what this will mean for them. And this is where sometimes I wish many of these, particularly Black women who are the first for these things, could understand or know how overwhelmingly emotional it feels to be able to see that somebody in that position, and especially with somebody who has those intersecting identities, and to know like the vitriol you're receiving, 90% of it isn't even based on what you're saying. It's just based on who you are. And that right there, just, I think for a lot of Black women, immediately pulls this sort of fighter stance out in you, where we just want to protect her. And it's not about who she's serving or what administration she's in. It's just about, we have seen too many of our own go through that and die because of that, whether sadly at their own hand or from others because of what they endured. To know that you are now put on this pedestal, and I can't imagine the burden that is, and to know what this path that you are carving forward. I don't think anybody actually wants that burden, and I don't think we don't protect our Black women the way that they deserve to be. And so, the first time I met her, there was just this moment where I could barely speak. And I just said to her, I don't think you know how much this moment means to me to see you in this position. And then I think what's wonderful about it too is since she's been in that position, I've had children come up to me or friends come up to me and be like, would you ever do that? Would you ever be? And I don't think that was a conversation or something we would have asked Black women before we saw career. And my answer is always no, because I can't control my face. So somebody would say something and my face would say exactly what I can confirm, while my mouth would try to.
I can 100% confirm this.
So again, major props to her for what she's doing, because I don't know if I would have the grace to stand there day after day and know that people are waiting and desperately trying to trip me up.
I mean, but similarly, though, you cover the African American community during what is a very historic moment. Like, that's got to be a burden for you, because on one hand, white reporters never have to think about the fact that they're covering white America. That's just normative to them. That's just called reporting. But when Black people report on Black America, it's somehow a niche. And so what does it mean to you as you cover these stories to, on one hand, feel like you've got to be objective, but on the other hand, you're human, like you have subjective opinions, you feel, you think just like everyone else. Like, what is that like?
So first and foremost, I feel very honored to be able to cover the stories that I cover, because we know that they are not getting the attention that they deserve. And I think about one topic I'm heavily invested in is the maternal mortality crisis and how it's affecting Black mothers and Black babies. And so I think about things like that. I'm like, I'm so lucky. And in a lot of ways, I'm so blessed that I am able to draw attention to these things, because sometimes I learn things that I didn't know about. And I'm like, if I didn't know it, God knows who else didn't. Right. Yeah. And we can't change anything or ask people to be well informed if they don't know what they don't know. To say what my mom always says. That being said, I am very much one of those reporters who does not believe in objectivity, because I think that objectivity is something that, as you kind of mentioned, we reserve it really only for people of color or for women when they're reporting. And it's like, well, you can't have any feelings about this. But the things that I'm covering do impact me. And the experiences that I've had don't make me a less capable reporter. In fact, I think that they give me a better understanding of why something is worth covering that somebody else might not think is worth covering, right? And so I think when we talk about objectivity and this idea that, you have to remain unbiased, I think that people who are able to remain unbiased or without an opinion are people who just aren't affected. And if you aren't affected, that's a very small percentage of people in this country, and they're a very homogenous group of people in this country. And sadly, in some cases, those are the people who are holding all of the power in this country as well. So I think that having my experiences and knowing what I know from those experiences gives me a viewpoint to be able to sit there and approach my editors or to approach a story and say, what is it that I think we're not talking about? What is it that I think people aren't aware of? And why should they be aware of this, or why should they care about it? And I think the other thing that I love that I get to do is really, bring forth voices that we overlook in media. I think that media has a habit of looking for like the most highly qualified, most prominent people. And those people aren't always Black women. They're not always Black men. They're not always Native or Indigenous peoples either. And
going to Harvard does not teach you everything you need to know.
Exactly. And I love being able to put the name of a Black LGBTQ female activist or professor or whatever it is out there into this print, or have them on my podcast for people to start to change what we picture when we think of who is or isn't an expert on a subject. Because our experts don't always have to be white men working at Harvard or at Yale. Our experts sometimes are the advocates, or the people who are on the front lines, or the people who can sit there and say, yes, I experienced police brutality, or yes, I was turned away from being able to vote because I took water from somebody as they were walking up and down after I stood in line for 5 hours. And I'm like, those stories, those experiences should serve and be just as worthy as somebody who is sitting there in the ivory tower that we always hear Republicans complaining about, doing their collecting their empirical data, but having no real stake in the game. And I love that I get to bring those voices forward.
Are there any voices or stories that have like really affected you that really stick with you?
Yes. So last week, I actually helped moderate a panel that The Hill did on the maternal health crisis. And we focused particularly on mental health for that. And I spoke with this woman, Kamisha, who is an absolute light on this planet. I think that she is an angel from somewhere. And she is clearly here for a purpose. And she shared her story of getting pregnant during COVID, realizing she was having a Black baby boy at a time when we just saw George Floyd murdered, and what that did to her just emotionally, and how it led her to having depression, how it led to her feeling isolated. And after she gave birth, the postpartum depression that she had, and the fact that she had a moment where she said she had a plan and she was going to end it. And talking that through with her, and then talking about how she came out of that. And now she's an advocate really for mothers, and especially for Black mothers and other mothers of color, to get the help that they need. And it just struck me, because sitting there talking with this woman who, again, she's just this, she's so smart and she's so passionate, and realizing that this was something that she had endured and she felt like she didn't have the help. And it had this moment that just left me sort of breathless. And then it starts me thinking about, well, how many other women have been affected by this, and how many of our political leaders are unaware that this is happening? And if our political leaders were aware, would they change the way that maybe our medical system is, or maybe the way that we take care of mothers? Or when we talk about reproductive health, what does that include? And so I think, for me, every time that I'm talking to somebody, it's a learning experience, because I get to learn about them. I get to learn about these experiences that deserve to be validated, that need to be validated. And then on the flip side of that, I'm able to sit there and say, well, how aren't we, as opposed to how are we providing, in supposedly the greatest country in the world, how are we still failing, particularly Black and brown folks, for something like we want, giving birth when we shouldn't be, right? We have all of these medical advances and technologies and all of these things and screenings and supposedly all of these things. And then you turn around and you talk to one woman and then another woman and another woman. And I cannot get over just how many women I have spoken to, particularly on this topic, who have shared about what they endured. And it just makes you sit there and think to yourself, well, what are elected leaders doing?
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is the question everybody has every day. Right.
Well, and to some degree, like, is it intentional? I mean, I got into a on-air debate with a Trump surrogate earlier today, and she kept talking about, mothers, we need to support mothers and the traditional family and yada, yada, yada. And I kept reiterating, you can't on one hand say that you want to support mothers, and on the same hand say you want to get rid of the ACA, which makes sure that being having a child isn't a pre-existing condition. Up until the ACA, once a woman had a baby, that was a pre-existing condition. She could be denied insurance, and because of the protections afforded by the ACA, which Donald Trump has attempted to repeal and has said he will repeal, women may not have those protections. You factor in that, and then now his support of abortion rights being decided by state legislatures. I don't know. I guess it just feels like we're at this big kind of like moment when it comes to body autonomy, to health, with facts, what's truth, these big societal questions. And what happens if Black people do sit out?
Yeah. So I've been asking myself this. I've been asking some of my sources this. Right now I'm actually working on a story about how young voters in particular and Black voters are feeling about what's happening overseas in Gaza. Mm-hmm. And there's been some reports that Black voters are saying, I'm not going to vote. I am going to sit out in a protest for what I'm seeing over there and our government's stance or response on it. And on the flip side to that, then I hear from people who talk about just how dangerous that can be.
Yeah.
Because if we're focusing only on one issue, they're saying we're missing out on all of these other things that are coming up that are at risk. And so I think especially about where we're hearing Black Americans say their top concerns are, and that includes things like the economy and inflation and jobs, which just putting out there is not all that different from what we hear from white voters.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it's always shocking when we hear that Black voters.
We got to keep the lights on just like everybody else. Yeah.
Right.
Kitchen tables. We all got them.
And then yes, like obviously Black voters are also concerned about racism and discrimination and criminal justice and all of these things that disproportionately affect us. But first and foremost, we're also concerned about the things that affect regular people.
Yeah.
Black people are regular people.
We're just normal Joes too.
We're just out here too, right?
Just the Johnsons just trying to kick it. Yeah.
Okay. And so then that's when things start to get interesting, is because they point, a lot of my sources will be like, this is a top of mind issue. This is something we can't let go. But if we don't vote because of this one issue, it's a domino effect. Mm-hmm. And so, if there's somebody out there who's sitting thinking, I'm not going to vote because I don't like that we haven't passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, for example. On the flip side of that, folks are pointing out is, well, but then you're also missing out on being able to make your voice heard on something like reproductive freedom, which at this point, I think it's 1 in 3 Black women at this point have said that they have considered not having children or any more children because of this, because they are too scared about what could happen in terms of the maternal mortality crisis, in terms of what would happen if they're not able to carry the child to term and they can't do anything about it. So you miss out on having your voice heard on that, or you miss out on having your voice heard on student loan debt forgiveness, which is a huge area of priority for a lot of Black Americans, because Black Americans carry disproportionate amount of student loan debt, and Black women carry the most student loan debt, right?
We don't have generational wealth to help us pay down that debt.
Exactly. And so it's really hard, because on one hand, I think advocates especially want Black voters to feel like they have a choice, right? But at the same time, the argument is, do we have a choice if all of these other things that could literally, as we said at the top, kill Black people? Do you actually have a choice then on whether or not you're allowed to vote, or whether or not you should vote? And it's just, I think it goes to show how complicated and how complex, and especially for young voters who are so emotionally driven by what's happening. And you think about what's happening in Palestine and Gaza and Israel, where they are driven by this emotional stance of people are dying. A lot of times not even the soldiers or those who are involved in the war, but innocent civilians or children. And that evokes an emotion that I think for many people is just a sense of horror. And
a connection between South Africans and apartheid. And I think that there's a clear underrepresented conversation around how young African Americans now support Palestinians, much in the way that our parents' generation supported Africans in South Africa who were being subjugated under apartheid. And I think that there hasn't been enough focus on that. I've even heard people compare it to as well, like the police violence that we see here in America perpetuated against Black bodies. And they say that's what's happening in Gaza right now, right? Is government sanctioned violence happening on innocent civilians for something they don't have control over. And so I think it's a really complicated conversation. I don't think there's exactly one right answer. But again, this is the part where people are pointing out is that Black voters feel so many things. They have so many ideas. They want to see so much change. And so then if we sit out, what's at risk? Is it worth sitting out to stand in protest of XYZ if the downfall then is all of the other issues that are top of mind concerns? Yeah, I mean, if you just think about it in terms of political strategy, doesn't that kind of play right into the hands of Republicans? I mean, it feels to me like Republicans are using Israel. Not feels like, I know for a fact, Republicans are using the conflict in Israel and Gaza right now as a wedge issue to separate the Jewish community and the African American community. When you look at student loans, they're using that as a wedge between the middle and lower class white Americans and saying, look at these progressive takers and black and brown people who took out loans and now don't want to pay them back. Mm-hmm. One, how is it that Republicans have been so good at using these wedge issues to keep minority groups or to keep communities from coming together, which I think obviously is a historic question. And two, is it something that there is enough time between now and Election Day for there to be that reunification of the Obama coalition?
So I think, first and foremost, I don't think enough people realize that tactic of creating division between minority or oppressed groups is fully a white supremacist tactic, right? The idea is this class system of you're better or you're not better, or, they're trying to steal from you the rights that we're actually withholding from all of y'all. And so I think that conversation isn't happening enough. I think because of that, right, the question becomes then, or not the question, but maybe the answer is then everybody's on the defensive, right? We hear white folks, I'm not a racist. I just don't believe in black people being X, Y, Z, whatever it is. Right? Yeah. But the idea of being called a racist is so absolutely horrifying in this day and age, whether or not it's true. And in this case, I think that it's something similar where the idea of being like, I'm not anti-Semitic or I'm not this, and it becomes defense. And how do I prove that? And well, in order to prove it, I guess then I have to do what they're saying that I should do. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that Republicans don't need a multiracial coalition to win. And Democrats do, right? Democrats cannot rely only on white suburban moms to get out there and cast their ballot. Democrats need to have Black voters. They need to have Hispanic voters. They need to have LGBTQ and Asian voters. They cannot win without that coalition. And I think that's becoming more and more apparent, particularly as younger generations are getting more diverse and getting seemingly more progressive as well, where their concerns are being focused. And I think there's still time, again, because for us, we're sitting here going, oh my God, everything's about the election right now. I don't have any time to do anything. But for the rest of the nation, they're sitting there right now thinking about, well, I have to go to work tomorrow and I got to give this presentation at work, or my paycheck doesn't come until Friday, but right now I need $50 to be able to do X, Y, Z. So they're not even thinking about that. But I think especially now that we've got debates coming up, and especially the more airtime Donald Trump is going to get, and I think people are going to be thrust back into essentially 2020 without COVID, fingers crossed, hopefully. Yeah, and it's going to be a reminder of this is what an election year actually looks like. With all of the crazy, with all of the chaos, there's going to be more campaigning events. We've got 2 conventions coming up. And Lord knows what's going to happen at those conventions. Obviously, there's concerns.
Chicago, 1968 all over again. You're a Chi-Town girl.
Exactly what people are saying. I just did an interview with somebody who was asking, like, are we going to see a repeat of what happened in 68? And it's like, okay, well, let's everybody breathe and calm down. But folks are now just starting to get back into the mindset of, oh, crap, we're in an election year. And we're just going to be hearing more and more. There's going to be more ads. Those ads are going to get more and more intense, especially, I think we can fully say, with Donald Trump. He's not one to hold his tongue, right? He doesn't believe in diplomacy. I don't think he knows what diplomacy looks like. He knows what he looks like and he knows what he wants to see. And so we can, I think, start to expect people to become more invested as time goes on. And as we get closer to November, I think that's when we're really going to start to see people being like, my vote does matter, and I can't withhold my vote no matter what I want to protest, because I'm sitting here staring at 2 candidates, both of them relatively old, both of them very white.
Relatively, I mean, they're old. It's okay to say it, like they're old.
Right. And I think people are, I wish that I could be a regular person who didn't have to worry about politics right now. But I know within the next 2 months, everybody else is going to be where we're at, right? Yeah. Where they're going to be freaking out. And they're going to be like, oh my God, polls are saying this. And then we're going to be having this conversation again about, okay, calm down over the polls, everybody. It's okay. It's okay. Just wait for a second. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm seeing it right now.
And then as we close out, what are you hearing about Tim Scott being Donald Trump's VP selection? Yeah, exactly. You know, I got to ask the black reporter who covers black politics about the black VP.
Tim Scott is heavily campaigning to be
heavily campaigning.
And it is not met with as much positivity as he would like, I believe, especially from black leaders. Let's not forget, I believe it was Reverend Al Sharpton who said that he looks like he's up on that stage ready to basically bootlick some shoes up there. So I think as time goes on, I'm hopefully pretty soon we're going to hear from Donald Trump. Obviously, he's got some other worries at the moment. But I think that we can expect to see him pick a black person or a female running mate.
You really think he's going to pick a black person? Really?
I think that he has enough. Donald Trump is not politically savvy. I think we can all admit that. He is savvy enough to know how to speak to his supporters. He is not politically savvy. That being said, the people around him are. And they know exactly what's at stake. And they're going to look to the Biden campaign and they're going to say, sure, Biden might look like he's struggling right now, but he's also got a black woman at that, as his running mate. And we are trying to build support among black voters, not necessarily in a great way. Sitting there talking about how black voters are going to vote for you because you're a criminal is not a winning strategy. Let's just put it out there. Also,
I mean, you don't have the Trump shoes. Like, I'm a sneakerhead.
I mean, I don't know if people need to know this, but like, not all black people are criminals. Okay, like we're not all sitting up in jail.
Yeah, tell that to Laura Ingraham.
Although, unfortunately, we are represented not from our whatever. Again,
that's a whole different conversation.
But just tossing that out there, we're not all criminals. So I think that he has,
except for Diddy. Diddy is a criminal.
Who? I'm sorry, we don't.
Yeah.
Who's this man?
I just had to say it. Just that he's a criminal. Next.
We don't know him. We don't claim him. Not in this household. But I think Donald Trump has enough folks around him who are going to recognize that they need a different strategy if they really want to cut into what appears to be thus far waning but still solid support for Joe Biden from black voters. And
black people are stupid. I'm sorry. Nah, I can't buy that though. All skin folk are not kinfolk. Black people are not voting
I don't think that Tim Scott would be a smart choice.
Yes. Okay.
Black voters are not, and especially black men.
White Republicans, whenever I have this discussion, they're like, what do you mean? Tim Scott's so great. What do you mean? He'll turn out black vote. I'm like, you don't understand.
White Republicans.
Yeah.
Not even white Republicans. It's white folks who don't understand the nuances of what it means to be a black
man. We will overturn out if you put him on the ballot.
Okay. He would be better to choose someone like Byron Donalds, who black folks don't have as many issues with, because they're like,
we know Byron's in.
I might not be in love with you, but you're not Tim Scott. And I hate to say it because I don't like to put black folks down. Yeah. But Tim Scott is someone that a lot of black voters see as that sort of Uncle Tom type of figure. And then especially, when you think about how he was running his own campaign where he didn't even want to talk about the fact that he was black.
No.
And it was like, bro.
He put a Confederate base in his entry to the presidential race. His first ad showed a Confederate base in South Carolina. Like, come on, dog. Like,
it's
come on.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So again, I think maybe not. Let me rephrase this then. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might not be a black running mate, but I don't think he's going to go for your stereotypical white dude running mate. I think that, again, he's got enough people around him who are going to have to say, like, we got to switch this up to be able to get, especially I'm thinking about Nikki Haley voters, right? They are the ones who are holding out. So
Trump's doubling down. The guy that scares me is J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance is who actually scares me.
He could be a really good choice for Trump, though. If you think about,
I don't know if Trump wants to have someone who is that close to being kind of the next in line. Like, he doesn't want to spend if Trump were to win, he doesn't want to spend 4 years looking over his shoulder at J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
which is why I think it'll be Doug Burnham. I think Doug Burnham's the choice. Okay. I think Doug Burnham is Mike Pence with a business record. He's rich. You know what? He feels the same way about him. Burgum's wife is a recovering alcoholic, which it matters because Trump's brother was an alcoholic, and it was someone he was really close to. And I think that that's something that like is a very bonding thing. I think Doug Burnham's going to be the pick for me.
Okay. I think I'm going to be sitting here waiting sort of with bated breath, not because I'm that invested in Trump's campaign. To be quite frank, again, we all know where my priorities are is with our Black leaders. Yes. But there's a part of me that's just going to be like, I don't know. And I had somebody ask me the other day too. They were like, who do you think he's going to pick? And I'm like, I don't know. Because the second that you start to think this man is going to do something. Yeah. He does the exact opposite just because he knows that you were thinking he was going to do something. And he just humiliates everyone on the way there. Like the way he just like takes them in and out. It's almost like he's in Amsterdam and puts him in like a red light window and it's like, dance for me. Like, Cheyanne Daniels, the Switch Up podcast. Go listen. Where can people find you on social media and read your amazing work? Oh, thank you so much. Yes, my work is under Cheyanne M. Daniels on the Hills website. The Switch Up podcast is literally wherever you get your podcasts. And as well as YouTube, you can see like our video chats with some of our guests there. That's always fun if that's your thing. And then you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Cheyanne Marie 97. You don't want my Instagram. It's horses. Nobody wants to sit there and see a horse girl talk about how cute her horse is after she just got thrown off the horse. So, I was just going to say, listen, man, for those of you who don't know, Cheyanne got thrown off a horse. And so like there's a whole backstory to this. Yes. I still love him. But yeah, do Twitter instead at Cheyanne Marie 97. And always feel free to submit any questions or anything y'all have for me. I'm always down to go out and find a story somewhere. Cheyanne, thanks so much for joining us. You are fantastic. I always appreciate you. Thank you so much, Michael. You are wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being with me today. Share this episode with others, like and review it. And please keep learning all you can to make informed voting this year. Come back next week for more truth in politics. I'm Michael Starr Hopkins, and this is It Matters.